problem. Zoro says he's only heard things about Loki and mentions Loki is oars-sized, which is so interesting to bring up oars, but we'll touch on that later. Something of note, Zoro said he has never talked to Loki, but then Zoro just kicks him to see if he's acting, which then makes Loki's condition even worse. Zoro not even waiting to hear Loki speak before doing anything is a bit crazy to me, and we will get back to that. When Luffy cries out that Loki died, Zoro says then he wasn't meant to survive, and Luffy is somewhat shocked at Zoro's brutality at this moment. Zoro then agrees they can unlock the cuffs, but they will keep one chain on his leg just in case, and Luffy says he'll go get a doctor, as well as meat, to help Loki get better. When Zoro says there's meat right behind them being Loki's animal friends, Luffy loses it and says they are friends. You don't eat friends. Of course, Loki's animal friends are something Luffy relates to, because he had his own during his 2-year time skip away from the crew. And now we know Chopper is totally safe from Luffy's biblical levels of greed. Suddenly, a boat falls from the sky, and the new giant pirates appear with Sanji in tow. I knew my wife would make it. Due to there being no clouds in the underworld, the boat is falling at a catastrophic speed, and Sanji saves only Girth as the rest of the giants bounce off of Luffy's stomach and back into the sky. My favorite line here is, "We only got severely injured instead of immediately dying." Because, you know what? That is such a nice way to look at it. Glass half full, guys. Hyduden then tells Luffy Rodo told them everything, and he begs Luffy to not free Loki due to Loki being cunning, cruel, vicious, backstabbing, and conniving. They literally call him a villain, and if Loki is saying anything that made him sound sympathetic, then he is lying. We get to the last page, which is a double-page spread of Loki standing up. Good God. Loki moves to grab a hammer, Luffy exclaims in shock because he thought Loki was passed out, and Hyduden yells at Loki to take his hand off Ragnar. And so, the chapter ends. Alright, a lot to touch on. Let's go backwards and start with Loki. I still trust him. I simply still trust him. I just think he's in a shit situation. Why do I still trust him? Because we saw his injuries. We saw what actually happened to him. And it seems no one will believe him anyways. Even after Loki gets run through by a weapon as terrifying as Shamrock's, he still gets kicked to see if it's an act, and is said to be a villain as he's bleeding out in chains. I don't think Loki has faked passing out per se, because for all I or you know, this is just a guy working off of adrenaline after being beaten senseless right now. Honestly, I think the next chapter might just have Loki passing out where he stands, since, again, we saw the damage Shamrock did to him, which even Loki said he couldn't really take. And it was not pretty. I don't know, guys, I kind of trust the guy who was attacked and nearly killed by the world government, especially if Luffy seems to like them and is concerned for them. I still think Loki's story is going to be a lot more complicated than just he's a trickster villain, and I'm starting to believe even when Loki was in pain or needed help as a child, no one would ever believe him to help him. Whatever backstory Oda's got cooking for Loki, it has got to be a good one. Not to mention Hyduden said if he told you anything that made him sound sympathetic. But Loki didn't say anything sympathetic to Luffy. He even straight up told Luffy he hated Shanks. And he then just made a deal with Luffy about Shanks' whereabouts. There was nothing sympathetic about anything he said to Luffy. So how many times has Loki been sympathetic to someone just for them to think he's tricking them? We also still have Loki's phone friend in play, who said he hides his kindness under all those harsh words. Not to mention addition, he's made friends with all these animals, and he has his little stinkmen who love him. Where are they, by the way? I want to hope Loki told them to go hide. Either way, the only things we've heard about Loki are rumors, yet already what we're seeing feels contradictory to it. The giant said he went crazy with the animals and burnt down villages. But again, I don't think it's as simple as Loki just being a villain. So for now, I still trust him. And he sure is standing there, isn't he? Ladies, he's over 6 foot, by the way. Next thing to touch on, Zoro. Are we believing he's feeling off yet? Do you guys believe me now when I say he's feeling different? Now, don't get me wrong, Zoro can be harsh. Zoro can be strict. But to the point it angers Luffy and causes Luffy to go off at him isn't normal. Yes, we can make the argument Zoro is being logical. This much is true. But the brutality behind some of his words are not the most logical. Saying he hasn't even talked to Loki before and then kicking him before giving him a chance to even speak. Saying a dying man isn't his problem while Luffy clearly wants to help him. And then saying if he's dead, then he wasn't meant to survive, as Luffy calls that messed up and mean. Now, here's the irony. Zoro has been in this exact same situation in his own introduction arc. Zoro was strung up by the Marines in a deal to starve. The deal was a trick, and if it weren't for Luffy, well, Zoro would be dead. Now let's look at Luffy in relation to Zoro's introduction. Koby tells Luffy that Zoro is nothing but a crazy bloodthirsty monster. Luffy tells Koby he's thinking of untying Zoro, to which Koby says Zoro will kill everyone, and Luffy says he wouldn't let Zoro kill them if he does try. Then as Luffy meets Zoro, he sees Zoro is putting on a tough facade just to see there's a genuine kindness in Zoro's heart. Now, doesn't that nearly sound exactly like what's happening with Luffy and Loki in Elbaf? Which is why it's simply so ironic Zoro is believing rumors over his own captain's intuition and desire to help Loki. Because Zoro is saying if Loki dies chained to the tree, he was meant to die. Yet, had it not been for Luffy during Zoro's own recruitment arc, Zoro would have died tied to that pole. In the same way, Loki would probably die and bleed out had Luffy not stumbled upon him and wanted to help him. Zoro's fierceness in this chapter, his aggressiveness and his arguing with Luffy is definitely a sign of other anxieties that must be bubbling in Zoro right now. I've said how many times Zoro kind of acts like a dick when he's angry, nervous, or upset. And this behavior of his is so rough right now that Luffy is calling him out for it. Again, Luffy is telling him he's being too mean. Luffy's not so much agreeing with Zoro as he is confused as to why Zoro is being this aggressive. And, as a case in point, when Luffy says he can deal with something, Zoro usually always trusts him to deal with them. For some reason, Loki specifically is making Zoro nervous. This is the same guy who trusted Luffy to handle Crocodile all the way back in Alabasta, literally leaving him to fight. And this is the same guy who trusted Luffy to take on Kaido by himself. Zoro is protective of his crew, but his captain is a whole other deal as he mostly trusts Luffy to handle himself. Once again, Luffy called Zoro really strict in a previous chapter. Now Luffy is saying Zoro's being mean. We know we are supposed to be paying attention to all this because Luffy's reaction is very telling that this is not normal behavior for Zoro. After all, I don't remember the last time Zoro full-fledged kicked an injured man before they could even talk just to see if they're faking their injuries. No matter how you look at it, this was overly aggressive. And again, this is rough behavior that's stemming from Zoro's own conflicts he's got to be having right now. We've also seen this meaner side of Zoro when Egghead ended, and he essentially said Luffy shouldn't be crying over some old man who just died. This seems so out of pocket, even Jinbe, who he was talking to at the time, was shocked to hear such harsh words from Zoro. Personally, the character reactions are everything to me. I don't know why Oda would add Jinbei being shocked, or Luffy angrily calling Zoro mean or harsh if it were just Zoro being rational. Fun fact for those who didn't know, you can be both rational and empathetic. But personally, I don't think we were ever supposed to take Zoro's comment about Luffy crying over Vegapunk as something rational. And I don't believe Zoro saying Loki dying isn't his problem, and kicking an injured man before even talking to him is rational either. Another thing to mention is Zoro mentioning oars. He calls Loki oars-sized, meaning oars is something he very much remembers, and what happened in the arc where oars was introduced. Multiple Straw Hats nearly being crushed by oars for 1, Kuma appearing and putting Zoro through hell for 2. Zoro does not have good memories with oars, and this only adds to some pressing problems he probably has that are weighing on him right now. Even worse, at the beginning of Elbaf, Zoro and the others were kidnapped by Rodo without Zoro even noticing until waking up with everyone. Then, to continue on, Zoro meets Gaban, and Gaban clearly scared the shit out of Zoro, just for Gaban to call it a joke. Either way, it feels like multiple areas of Elbaf are just there to mock Zoro. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Zoro is being mocked. I don't think he is. I'm saying when it comes to himself, to his own thoughts. It's possible the more he encounters in Elbaf, the more on edge he becomes. But it seems others are finally starting to notice Zoro's